Have you ever gotten the feeling of deja vu? Well, anyway, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is a new animated series on Netflix that's based on the original series. Seriously, we just did this. So, yeah, in addition to Revelation, there were two Masters of the Universe reboots that were coming out this year, and this one kind of slipped in under the radar. In fact, I didn't even know about it until I heard it mentioned in someone else's video who was talking about Revelation. And no, it's probably not any of the videos you're thinking of. However, unlike Revelation, this one is more of a reimagining. There's Masters of the Universe stuff in it, but it's very different from any of the other series we've seen before, and it's geared a little bit more towards a younger audience, as well as being the first Masters of the Universe series done completely in CGI. So it starts out with Evelyn and Cronus. Yes, Evelyn and Cronus, the characters that would eventually become Evil Lyn and Trapjaw, attacking the palace. Meanwhile, Teela finds the Sword of Power inside the palace, and it tells her to find the champion, obviously, which is going to be Prince Adam. So she eventually finds Prince Adam, or just Adam, because he lost his memory and doesn't know that he's a prince and son of Randor, and he was eventually adopted by a tribe that lives in the forest. And while he grew up with the tribe, he made a friend, Crass, who is Female Ram Man. Yes, Female Ram Man, which is kind of weird. She would eventually call herself Ram Mam, which I gotta admit is kind of clever. And they're eventually joined by Duncan, who is Man-at-Arms, basically, even though he's the same age as everyone else in the show. He was Cronus's apprentice, and he's very good with machinery and technology, so he's kind of the brains of the group, just like Man-at-Arms was. Cringer is also there, but he's not the cowardly cat that he's usually depicted as. He's actually kind of older and wise and very brave and eager to fight and help out. But it is kind of confusing that they called him Cringer, although they do actually explain why he's called Cringer, and he's also missing his claws, and they explain why he lost his claws. And it was actually a very interesting backstory that connects to another character that we see a little bit later on. Eventually, though, Duncan makes him a pair of metal claws, so he's able to use those instead, so that was kind of nice of him. And eventually, Orko shows up, and if you saw the trailer for this, you know that Orko in this is a robot, or rather, he's a robot that thinks he's Orko, because apparently Orko does exist in this world, but this robot got messed up or something. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but he apparently just thinks he's Orko, and all of his abilities as a robot he thinks is magic, which I find kind of amusing. So we find out that the whole thing was orchestrated by Keldor, who is the brother of King Randor and uncle to Adam. And if you're not familiar with this character, he eventually becomes Skeletor. Skeletor's had a couple different origins over the years, and depending on which version of Masters of the Universe you're watching, but I think most people prefer this one, that he was at one point Adam's uncle, which I do find more interesting than him just being evil for the sake of evil, you know, because it actually gives him motivation and connection to the main character, because the reason why he's always trying to take over Eternia is because he thinks it's his birthright, because, you know, he's the brother to the current king, and he wants to rule, and of course him being the uncle of Adam and ultimately He-Man does make their conflict a little bit more interesting. Keldor's deal in this is that he kidnapped Prince Adam and took him to Castle Grayskull to try and get the power from it, but because he had malicious intent and wanted to use the power for his own selfish needs and he wanted to rule Eternia, he kind of got cursed, and he got the Havoc Staff, which turned him into kind of part of a skeleton, which he had to go into hibernation for a little while, and then eventually he woke up and joined the others. This also explains why Prince Adam lost his memory and was taken from the king and eventually found by the tribe. So when he wakes up, he joins Evelyn and Cronus, and eventually they're also joined by Beastman, who is like a crazy old man who lives in the woods and captures animals and makes them fight. And I thought that was a little bit off-putting at first, but eventually I was okay with it, and you'll see why in a minute. So eventually Adam gets the sword and transforms into He-Man, and part of me feels like the design of He-Man in this is a little bit comical. I mean, I know He-Man is supposed to be like ridiculously huge and everything, but I don't know, for some reason this version seems a bit strange to me. I think it's because he's way over exaggerated. Like, He-Man was always big and muscular, but, you know, it was like proportioned properly. Like, he was bigger than the others and stronger than the others, but like the proportions were correct. This one, he's got like a tiny head and giant arms and a torso and tiny little legs. It feels a little bit weird to me. Also, Yuri Lowenthal is the voice of Adam in this. And I love Yuri Lowenthal. I think he's a great voice actor. But he has the same voice when he's He-Man. Like, when you transform into He-Man, your voice has got to be big. You got to be strong. You got to be powerful. But it's the same. Like, he's got a very youthful voice to him. And it doesn't feel quite right, you know? One thing I do kind of like, though, is that he has the power to transform all of his friends. You know, previously it was just Cringer into Battle Cat, which he still does. But he takes his 3 friends and actually powers them up. And they start to look a little bit more like their original counterparts. With the exception of Teela. Teela in this one is very different. But Duncan gets, you know, the armor and everything. And Crass turns into Ram Mam. And she has a helmet with like a jetpack. And she just bounces into things. So I thought that was kind of a cool little addition. Because if he can do it to Cringer, why can't he do it to other people? And the same thing happens with Skeletor. He uses the Havoc Staff to transform them to look a little bit more like their original counterparts. I do particularly like Beastman's transformation because he starts out as just a guy, and during his transformation sequence, like, the Beastman form kind of claws his way out of his body and he turns into, you know, the orange furred Beastman that we all know and love. So anyway, like I said, this was the first CGI He-Man series, and I'm fine with that. Although there was something like a little strange to me about it. Like, I think it was something about the overly toyetic design of everything and the CGI that made it feel like, and I'm wondering how many people are going to know what I'm talking about here, but I think in the 90s and I think into the 2000s as well, sometimes they would sell a toy or an action figure or usually like a playset, and it would come with like a VHS or a DVD of like a short little animated movie that goes along with the toy line. Here's an example of one right here. This is Dragons Fire and Ice. This is like a Mega Bloks set. Yeah, this was a Mega Bloks toy line, and this came with, I think, a big playset or something. And it was just like a little CGI movie, and it had, you know, the characters from the play set and everything. It was just a little extra thing that came along with it. That is kind of the vibe I get out of this. Again, it's a very toyetic show, which makes sense because it's geared more towards kids. But like, I couldn't help but think of stuff like this when I was watching it. I've heard people compare this to Troll Hunters a little bit, and I can definitely see why. Although this isn't nearly as edgy and mature as Troll Hunters was, it doesn't take a lot of chances. And, well, while I'm on the subject, let me just say, the Tales of Arcadia series is criminally underrated. Like, it's probably my favorite thing on Netflix right now. All the shows, I love the characters, and the movie, except for how the movie ended, but that's a completely different rant. The thing that probably bothered me the most about this show was it was very, very heavy on humor. There was like every 5 minutes there had to be a joke or a gag, and there were just so many of them, one after another. And I wouldn't mind that so much if they spaced them out a little bit more. Like, it just seemed like there were scenes where they just fire off one gag, one joke, just one after another, and it just felt too dense with humor. Like, when you want to put humor in something like this, you got to space it out. You got to, you know, sprinkle it along, you know, each episode just to get, you know, add levity and make it a little bit lighthearted, because again, this is supposed to be a kids show, but they went a little bit overboard with it. I did like a lot of the references to the original Masters of the Universe as well. Like, Adam being a part of a tribe kind of calls back to the original story of He-Man from the mini comics, where he was a barbarian, part of a primitive tribe, and then eventually he becomes the champion. And also, the story with Adam in this is very reminiscent of the original story of She-Ra, how she was captured by the Horde as a baby, and she had no memory of her previous life, and she grew up completely unaware of who she was. I like that they established that the sword is the key to unlocking Grayskull, which again goes back to the original toy line. And I like that we're seeing a little bit more of that, because that was kind of an important part of the play logic of the original toy line, and it was a big part of the comic series. Teela in this is a young magic user, and you can see her a lot of times using her magic or trying to use her magic to help out. And a lot of times she's getting help from the Guardian of Grayskull that is the current Guardian of Grayskull, sort of. She appears to them as a ghost, but they interact quite a bit. And I'm feeling like she's going to eventually become the new Guardian, which, again, is the thing that Teela is supposed to do. Although, personally, at this point, I don't know if this Teela is more Teela, our Teela that we know, Duncan Man-at-Arms' daughter, the original Sorceress's daughter, or that's who she's kind of supposed to be. Not really, but kind of. Or is this supposed to be the actual Sorceress? Because Sorceress in Masters of the Universe, her real name was Teela Na. So I'm not entirely sure which direction they're going with this, but it would be nice to see, a Teela character finally get, fulfill their destiny and become the Guardian of Grayskull, because we keep getting that teased to us, and it just never happens. So hopefully that's where this is going. When Duncan does his transformation, he becomes more like Man-at-Arms. He has like the big shoulder pad, which is what the original toy was. And he also has a club, which is kind of like the club that original Man-at-Arms used, which we don't really see very often. So I kind of like that little detail. Although I think my favorite reference was there's a scene where they were headed towards Snake Mountain and they were about to go in, and then Skeletor calls out to them from a big microphone that he has. And for those of you who don't know, in the original Snake Mountain playset, which of course I have with me at all times, they had a microphone that you would talk into and your voice would come out. It's battery powered and it requires a 9-volt battery, which I don't have because I don't think I've had to buy a 9-volt battery in like 20 years. But you would talk into this, and the voice would come out of here. So I thought that was a really neat reference to the original Snake Mountain playset. Another really cool plot point was the whole thing with Adam and his father. Because he was taken as a young child, he doesn't really know his father. He doesn't have a lot of memories of him. And now that he's He-Man, he wants to prove himself to King Randor, who's as usual, kind of a dick in this, but he comes around eventually. And I thought that was a really cool callback because that was also a plot point of the Filmation series about how Randor thought that Adam was useless, but he's secretly He-Man, and he does a lot of good, but Randor doesn't see that in Adam. He only sees that in He-Man. So it was kind of a conflict. They didn't do a whole lot with it in Filmation, but I like that they established some of it in this show. So overall, it's alright. Yeah, I don't have any major complaints about it, and the few problems I had, I kind of got used to as I was watching it. There's a lot I liked about it. I like the characters. I think it serves its purpose well, and it's a very different interpretation of Masters of the Universe, which is a good thing. And it doesn't try to be anything more than it actually is. It doesn't make any promises it can't keep, like saying it's a continuation of the series like Revelation did, which it is not. And like I said, it's different, which is a good thing. And it's certainly not the strangest version of He-Man that has ever existed. Hopefully one day I'll review this, because nobody ever talks about this one. And hey, maybe the series will get better as it goes on. Some Netflix shows are kind of like that. They start out a little bit slow, and eventually they reach greatness and people really like them. So maybe that'll happen with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. But for now, that's all I have for He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the 2021 Netflix series. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of it. My name is Rob, and by the power of Grayskull, have a wonderful day.